with you all once a year, just to keep you updated, just to let you know we're still alive and y'all haven't been giving to a ministry that has ceased to exist. But also, it's just that we feel like we've just made so many great friends here. And it's great to see you all again this morning. So, I was thinking this morning, and in fact, I just leaned over to Pastor Tim during the songs, and I literally had goosebumps. And not because I'm cold. I had goosebumps because Pastor Tim did not know what I was going to talk about this morning. And yet, the very first song addressed it, nailed it, right? He called me, I came running out. Now, in the story we're going to talk about this morning, the person didn't come running out because he couldn't. He came out, but he didn't come running. Just as an update, Lynn and I had lived in Indiana for 17 and a half years, and we started DecAid Project from Indiana with Dr. Sean Swan. And then a year ago, we moved to Columbia, South Carolina. And I'll tell you, I'm rejoicing in God every day that He brought us back to the South and away from the evil North. The evil, cold, dark, gray North, right? I mean, we had some cold days in Columbia this winter. We even had 2 inches of snow one night, and it would melted by noon the next day. I'm like, thank you, Jesus. I didn't have to shovel, right? And then we did something really stupid. Our daughter said, I need to get out of town for a few days to go visit a friend, and her husband drives truck at night. She said, would y'all come up and stay with our kids for a week in Fairbanks, Alaska in February? Now, we lived in Alaska just outside of Fairbanks for 6 years. I know what February is like, but we haven't been there in February for 18 years. You kind of forget. And so Linda flew up on a Friday, and I flew up on a Wednesday. I didn't want to burn a whole week vacation in Alaska in February. I didn't remember that much. I got on the plane in Charleston, South Carolina. It was 72 degrees. It was not 72 degrees in Fairbanks, Alaska. It was minus 22. There's something about a 94-degree temperature swing that makes you just shrivel up and die inside. And then we were there. I was there 4 days before we flew home. Not only did it never get above zero for that 4 days, we got a foot of snow on top of the 120 inches they had already gotten this winter. And I looked at Linda and I said, never again. If we ever go back to Alaska to visit, it will not be in February. Now, I'm not going to say never too strongly, because I used to say I would never go to Alaska when we lived in South Florida. And then God, with His amazing sense of humor, very clearly called us to Alaska. And it was a great 6 years, but I don't ever want to live there again. But we did move into our new igloo recently. And friends of ours came by because they thought we should have a housewarming party. Now we're homeless. Some of you are getting that. Some of you are like, what? Igloo, housewarming. There we go. There we go. I used to love to tell those, I call them progressive jokes, when I was teaching junior high and high school algebra at 8 o'clock in the morning. And the first thing you had to do was wake up your junior high and high school students every morning. And I would tell progressive jokes. So meant 2 or 3 would get it at first, and they would kind of chuckle or groan or roll their eyes. They were all the same to me. And then slowly their friends would be like, huh? They'd say, oh! But what I'm going to do a couple of things this morning. I want to talk to you a little bit about the story of Jesus and Lazarus. I have shared some of this before here, but there's a lot of people that weren't here when I did that a number of years ago. And then I also want to tell you how that applies to the work of DecAid Project in Haiti and Cambodia, and an update what's going on right now. And we'll talk a little bit about the impact of COVID, because will we ever not have to say that again? COVID caused, or because of COVID, you don't have to drive very far to see the impact of COVID, right? I'm sure in your own town, in your own area, there are places that no longer exist, in part because of COVID, or probably primarily because of COVID, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. But I want to talk to you about the story that we find in John 11. So Jesus is doing ministry in Jerusalem. His good friend Lazarus and his two sisters live in Bethany. That's 4 miles, right? So Jesus is doing ministry, and people come to him and say, the friend that you love so dearly, Lazarus, is sick. And he's not just sick, he is really sick. And we think he's going to die. And Jesus makes this kind of offhand comment to his disciples who kind of assume that he's immediately going to pack up his ministry, his big loud speakers and microphone and all that stuff, right? And he's going to pack all up in his semis, and they're going to haul it down the road the 4 miles to Bethany. And Jesus says this, he says, hey, he's not really sick. He's sick, but it's not going to end in death. Right? So that he continues to minister in Jerusalem for another 2 days. And then he says, it's time to go to see Lazarus. We need to go to Bethany because Lazarus is asleep. His disciples say this. So think about this, a very logical conclusion that they make. Well, if he was really sick, but he's sleeping, what do we always tell people to do when they're sick? Rest, right? But if he's just sleeping, that's a good thing, right? That means he's going to get better. And it says that Jesus basically had to clarify what he meant, because he was using the biblical term for sleeping, and what he really meant was, and so he had to tell his disciples, well, not sleeping, he's dead. And so they walk the 4 miles to Bethany, greeted by the sisters who say, if you had only come when we sent someone to tell you that our brother was sick, he would still be alive. And in the course of this scripture, we get, everybody's favorite first verse to memorize in the Bible. Right? Jesus wept. Because no matter how badly you memorize, you can probably get that one. Right? At the very least, if someone says, what Bible verses have you memorized? At the very least, you'd be able to say, Jesus wept. Right? And so Jesus says, and they say, he's dead. And Jesus responds to them and said, no, he's sleeping. And he walks to the tomb, and this is where the really important thing. And if we look through the Bible, there's stories like this all through the Bible. And here's what I want to talk to you about. Jesus does the ultimate transformation in people's lives. He's the one that brings us from death to life, right? That critical moment when we accept Christ. And he uses people. He uses us to help free people from their bondage. Not all addict is immediately brought out of addiction. There are stories of people who have, and those are wonderful. But are they more transformational? Are they more powerful than the story of a person who walks the journey accompanied by Christian friends? Really? In the same way, is the story of someone who was a horrible sinner and was out committing all these vile acts coming to Christ, is that any more miraculous than the story of the person who grew up in the church, never really went off the deep end, and yet was still a sinner, but spared some of those scars and memories? Is that less miraculous? They're coming to Christ. So Jesus uses us to help break chains and bonds. So Lazarus has died. He's greeted by the sisters who are weeping, and they're like, Jesus, if you would just come. It's almost an accusation. If you had just come 2 days ago, you could have been here in a couple of hours. You can walk 4 miles in an hour, hour and a half, if you're walking briskly, and it's not all mountains, right? Go ahead. Jesus comes, and here's where he first begins this movement of, y'all are going to be part of this process, right? So he says to those standing there, move the stone. In the Jewish tradition, you don't get buried underground. You get buried in tombs above. If you look at a Jewish cemetery, they're mausoleums. They're not in-ground graves, they're in buildings. He said, move the stone. Well, Jesus could have spoke the stone away, right? He could have. But I think what he's doing is demonstrating the importance of what he needs, what he wants from us in terms of Christian community. And so he says to them, move the stone. And so they walk over to move the stone, and then Jesus does what only Jesus could have done. And he says, Lazarus, come out here. And there's Lazarus. Now, remember I said before in the song, the words are, I ran out? Yeah, it wasn't an option for Lazarus. It was more like, right? I mean, how else would he have come out? It doesn't say anybody went in and got him. It said he called Lazarus to come out, and he comes. Here's what Jesus says next. Jesus didn't walk up to him and remove his grave clothes. Go ahead. He told those around him, let him go. Free him. You do that. Right? Remember back to the story about what I said about not every addict is immediately released. Not every addict is immediately. In fact, I would say to you, every single one of us brings with us, with our new life, some old bags. Right? Even that one who grew up in the church that never went out, and let me tell you something, they had thoughts. Right? They probably did some things in secret they thought nobody knew about. And the person who, all the way to the end of the person who just had this vile, vile life. We all bring with us some of that junk. Right? So what does God call us to do? He calls us to fellowship with one another for a couple of reasons. One is we need the encouragement of one another. We need the instruction from our pastors and teachers. And we need that fellowship that allows us to begin to walk through life together. I have a warning. It is really messy. It's really messy. And your heart will get broken from time to time. Because people you're walking through that journey with will fall back sometimes. Right? There's a young man from our church in Indiana who, not by any intentionality on my part, we developed a close friendship and a kind of a mentoring friendship, and apparently I really, really am bad at it. But Tyson and I would meet for breakfast and we would talk, and he and his wife had two beautiful little girls and a little boy who were my buddies. They would see me at church, they would come running for a hug and a high five, a fist bump, and all those other things from the time they were little. And then they had a baby that was very premature, and it lived for about a year, but spent a lot of that time in and out of children's hospitals in Cincinnati and Indianapolis. And I remember the day I got the call from Tyson that they had taken the baby to the Cincinnati Children's Hospital, which is one of the best in the world. And it was beyond what Indianapolis Children's Hospital could do. And so they'd taken the baby there, and Tyson called me and said, Kevin, the baby just died. And so Pastor John, who's in our quartet that's been here in the past with me, and I jumped in my car, and we drove to Cincinnati. And he drove their car home, and I drove Tyson and his wife home. Didn't ask him any questions. I didn't ask him to talk. I just let him sit in the back seat and frankly sleep, because he hadn't slept for weeks with any kind of consistency. They came back, and Tyson's wife, about a year or so later, got pregnant again. And mid-pregnancy, at about 20 weeks, her uterus literally exploded. The baby was born, lived for a few months, still living. No, that's right. She lost that one right then. But then she got pregnant again, and another premature baby. And anyway, we moved from Indiana to Columbia, and a few weeks later, I get word that Tyson has left. I'm going to Indiana in May, and please be praying, because I'm texting Tyson and saying, I'm going to be there. He's a nurse. He works nights. Doesn't even live in Marion anymore. Lives about an hour away. But I'm going to try to connect with Tyson on early Sunday morning for breakfast before church. Just have a chance to talk. I tell you that story, and I have to warn you, sometimes I leak when I share some of these things, but it breaks my heart. And there's a selfish piece of me, honestly, and I have to keep asking myself, what's my motivation for my heart being broken? Because there is a piece of me, like there would be for all of us, the selfish piece to say, I've invested so much time in you, Tyson. Did I waste all that time I could have done other things with? I'm being really transparent here, because those aren't the kinds of things you typically talk about in front of people, right? You don't usually admit that there's that sense. But the reality is I love Tyson, I love his wife, I love his kids. And I don't know if God will use me to help bring them back together. I don't know. All I know is I have to talk to Tyson. But God uses all of us. He uses you, He uses me. When Jesus said to his disciples just before he ascended back into heaven, he said to them, go. The literal translation of the Greek is, as you are going, make disciples. None of us have an excuse to not be making disciples. I remember Keith Green, who died in the 1970s in a plane crash, one of the first popular contemporary Christian musicians. And I just another transparency, I'm a classic rock guy, right? Keith Green was my first introduction to Christian rock, followed quickly by Stryper and Petra and Whiteheart, and all of which you can find on my phone and my music. You will also find Charlie Daniels, post-conversion, some awesome Christian lyrics. I'm telling you, if you've not heard Charlie Daniels, any of his CDs after he became a believer, after his grandmother passed away, you should, because the lyrics in Charlie Daniels' music, whether you like country or not, the lyrics will stop you in your tracks. He has one song called The Hypocrites. Wow. If you shared that in most churches, people would get up and walk out mad. But Keith Green talks about there are no exemptions from that passage. Like, you can't duck and say, because it says go and make, oh, God didn't call me to be a missionary. No, it's as you are going, there are no exceptions. We're all called to do that work. That's what Jesus is calling us to in this story. Right? Question is, are you willing? That's what it requires, is willingness. Go ahead. So a couple of years ago, our board sat down and we looked at our mission and vision statements and we went, oh, those are bad. Not bad intentions, not necessarily bad things we were doing, but the way we had written them, using words like to adopt. How noble. We're going to adopt a Haitian village. Right? Sounded so noble. We thought this was a good thing, and then we realized we're not their daddy. These are people like us. They have different challenges, but they kind of all come back to the same basic things, and that's this. So I'm going to ask you a question. Audience participation time. What is poverty? Just shout out answers. What is poverty? Being poor, brokenness, needy. I think we just covered all of us in this room. In many ways, we are poor. We are certainly all broken, and we are definitely all needy. So in Genesis chapter 3, there's the story of the fall, right? And at the fall, there are 4 really important connections that God had created that were severed. Our relationship with God, our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with others, and our relationship with the earth. And everything else that we typically define as poverty are symptoms of those things. Lack of money, lack of food, lack of shelter, lack of water. Those are symptoms. And if all we do is treat those symptoms, it would be the equivalent of giving you an aspirin for a cancerous brain tumor. It might alleviate a symptom for a short amount of time, but the cancerous brain tumor is still there. And we don't always get to do them in the order that I just listed. We don't always help people restore those broken relationships in that order. It's sometimes the most important one, and that is our relationship with God, comes at the end or towards the end. Because here's the reality. If I walk into Haiti, to the village of Picni, which is where we began our work on the island of Laganab, when we walked in and we said, "You need Jesus," in English, no less. Right? First of all, you have no idea what I just said. And second, even if I have a translator there, why are you going to listen to me tell you you need Jesus? I'm a complete stranger from another country, and I don't even speak your language. Where's the trust? Why do I have any credibility with you? I don't. That's the simple answer. I don't. And so oftentimes, and it doesn't matter if it's in your next door neighbor or in Laganab, Haiti, or in Cambodia, or anywhere you name, if we do not first demonstrate to people that we love them, that we care about them, because you see, that's what earns us the right to share the gospel. Right? There are those rare occasions when we run into a complete stranger, and because God has led them there, I'll give you an example of that. One of our translators, when we first started doing this about 10 years ago now, we had 2 brothers who were twins, Jean and Jean Benet. Amazing young men. They were in their early 20s. And every morning, the people that work with us in Haiti, these guys, they're in their church in prayer meeting at 5 a.m. every morning, Monday through Saturday, 5 a.m. And then they work out in the fields, in their gardens until about 8 o'clock, and then they do translating work and training and all kinds of stuff. And then they come back home, and they work in their gardens till dark, which in Haiti, because it's fairly close to the tropics, is it's about 12 hours of daylight every day, all year. Doesn't matter what the time. And in Haiti, the president decides every year whether or not they're going to go to daylight savings time or not. Because it doesn't really save them any daylight. It just moves it back an hour, which is kind of what it does us too, if you think about it. All right. And so, but in Haiti, it's about 12 hours of daylight regardless. So Jean Benet related this story to me. He said, "Kevin," I love having the name of Kevin because every country I go to, I become Kevin. Doesn't matter what language they speak, it's Kevin. I said, "Kevin, a few weeks ago, God woke me up at 4 o'clock in the morning instead of 5 o'clock. And he said, 'Jean Benet, I want you to walk up the mountain.'" He said, "I wasn't planning to go up the mountain that day." He said, "God said, I want you to walk up the mountain. Because there's someone I want you to introduce me to." Sun came up at 5 o'clock. Jean Benet starts walking up the mountain. And as he gets about halfway up the mountain, which is about 3 miles, half is the full mountain. So he's about 1.5 miles up the mountain. and this older gentleman comes off a side trail. And in Haiti, greetings are long. I'm a little bit type A, right? When we're going to do a training, I want to get to the community and I want to start training, but that's not how it works in Haiti. God has taught me a couple of things. One, that people are more important than projects, because I'm very project driven, right? You tell me you got something you want me to accomplish, clear the path, because anyone between me and the goal is getting run over, right? But in the last 10 years, God has begun to really do that in me. I'm not perfect. I still have my moments of plowing. But so they begin to talk, and it goes something like this. Bonjour, good morning.
Good morning.
Comment est? How are you?
Doing all right. How are you?
Doing all right, yeah. Et tu es, yeah. How's your family?
Well, my wife is tired because she was up all night delivering kittens.
Oh, wow. In Haiti, that's a tasty treat.
Well, got to feed the people in poverty.
That's right. They don't eat dogs in Haiti. There are dogs everywhere, but you'll be hard pressed to find a cat unless it's someone who's from another country and they happen to keep the rats and mice down, right? Otherwise, you don't see a lot of kittens and cats. In fact, when I was teaching junior high and high school, this was probably not very nice, but it was me. I would have students in my class, and just to be honest, it was usually primarily girls going on and on about their cat, right? And I would say, you have a cat? Yeah, Mr. Jones, we have a cat. I love cats. And like, you do? I do. They taste like chicken. And my wife would always say, stop saying that. I said that to my 10-year-old granddaughter a couple of years ago. She and her siblings were visiting us for a week from Florida, and they called me from our house at work, and they said, Papa, can we go to the pet store and get a kitten? Well, here's what I knew that meant. The kitten would be staying at our house when they went home. I like dogs. I like lions and tigers, panthers. I'm not a big fan of house cats, which I know will make me the bad guy with some people. I'm sorry. We all have different animals that we really connect with, right? And I said, oh, Ellen, that would be awesome. I love cats. Tell Nana to get the grill ready, because they taste so good when you barbecue them. And she's like, Papa, you would really do that? No, Ella, I'm not trying to scar you for life. Anyway, so they have this long conversation. It's not a hello, how are you, and move on. It's a long, because the next thing we do, ask about the rest of your family and your extended family and any family you think you might ever have, and it just keeps going on. It's a good hour at the beginning of every session when we do training, this whole greeting, because everybody has to have a chance to greet, right? So they had this conversation, and they continue to walk up the mountain, and the gentleman says to Jean-Benet, are you a Christian? He said, I am. Tell me about this Jesus. And Jean-Benet said, Kevin, I wasn't sure where to start. So I was like, well, God created the heaven, and he starts at the story of creation, walks through the fall, walks through the coming of Jesus, his death, burial, and resurrection, and what that means. And the man looked at him and said, I want to know that Jesus. And so they kneel down in the path, and the man accepts Christ. And they get up and continue walking, and the man says to Jean-Benet, do you know who I am? He said, no. And the man says his name, which Jean-Benet knew his name. He was the lead witch doctor, the chief witch doctor on the island of Laganoff. And he said to Jean-Benet, he said, let me tell you what happened. At 4 o'clock this morning, God, your God, who I hated and have done everything to destroy, woke me up and said, I want you to walk down this path, because today, one way or the other, we're going to meet. I'm glad he chose A and not B. Another witch doctor related story. When I was there a year ago in December, one of the things when we take a medical team that does health assessments, we will always say to the translator, because it's the community health volunteers that dictate which homes we go to on any given trip. So over a period of 3 or 4 years, we see every family. But we don't do clinics. They're so impersonal and non-relational, and people are standing in the hot sun for hours and they may or may not be seen. We go from house to house and just do family groups. Build relationships. In fact, to the point where people say to me, what's it like to go back to Pygmy and Laganov year after year, just those same two places year after year? So I'll tell you what it's like. You're going to be able to relate with this in a minute. It's like going to your family reunion, but the weird uncle's not there. And I bet you just about every person in this room who has family reunions they attend, somebody's name just popped in your head. For me, it's the uncle who got up at a family reunion a number of years ago, and he said, we haven't gotten together for several years, so everybody, every father, introduce your family group, right? And so we're doing it. My uncle gets up and said, this is my son so-so, this is my son so-and-so, and he's available. Who does that at a family reunion? There's every level of wrong with that picture. But we're walking past the witch doctor's home and we're not stopping. And wait. We always make sure this has to be a place we stop. We stop here every time we come. Because here's why we do it. When you go into the home, we don't go inside, but in the courtyard of the home of a Haitian, in that culture, and you do something like see their family and do health assessments and create a document that you give to them. So if they have to go down to the hospital 3 hours away, they can take that and there's at least baseline information for them. When you've done that, you can ask for almost anything. And it would be rude for them to say, no, you know what we ask for? Can we pray over your home and your family? And the witch doctor every time, by culture, says, yes, begrudgingly, but yes. And we pray over his family and his home every time. And he said, no, Kevin, it's not that we don't want to go there. He doesn't live there anymore. And then I became concerned because I wondered why. And so I said to our translator, I said, it's not because all the new Christians are being mean to him, is it? He laughed. He said, no, Kevin, we love him. He said a few weeks ago, he came out of his home and he made this big announcement to the community. I am moving because none of y'all, he probably didn't say y'all, but I put that in there. None of y'all are buying my spells and medicines anymore. There are too many Christians in Pygmy. And he moved. And I looked at Medivh, the gentleman who's our primary trainer. I said, Medivh, do you know where he moved? He said, yeah. Make sure there's a Che committee there quickly. He's not running from Christians and Pygmy, he's running from God. And we're going to assist in tracking him down. So how has COVID impacted the work? By the way, if you went to Laganov, Haiti, and said, so what do you think of DecAid Project? They wouldn't even know who you were talking about. We don't talk about DecAid Project in Haiti. We talk about community health evangelism, Che. When we give our trainers polo shirts, they don't say DecAid Project on them, they say Che. You know why? Because the focus is not on DecAid Project. The focus is not on Kevin Jones and Sean Swan and anybody else that's there on our team. The focus is on the volunteers in the communities that are doing the heavy lifting. They're going into home after home after home, week after week after week. Hundreds of visits every month to share a community health lesson that has in it embedded a gospel lesson and a call to action. So we rewrote this, and really, frankly, it's a bunch of words, but it kind of shares our heart, what we're wanting to promote community health evangelism principles in partnership with community. Notice there's nothing in there about adopting anymore. Now it's partnering. And our mission is to equip communities to identify issues and mobilize resources to achieve positive, sustainable change. Lives and communities are transformed as people come to Christ and work together to address local needs. There's a lot more. Go ahead, next slide. It seamlessly integrates evangelism and discipleship with community health and development. Through Che Ministries, individuals become followers of Jesus and communities are lifted out of cycles of disease and poverty. Because you know what? These things are cyclical. Right? If you keep doing the same bad things continue to happen. The goal is to develop Che leaders by equipping, educating, and edifying. Development of local Che leadership encourages multiplication of community development, thus allowing the departure of the DecAid Project to other areas of the world. What are you thinking? You want to work yourself out of something to do? Yes. Yeah. Because it doesn't belong to us to start with. It belongs to them. You know what? We would have already stopped going back to Haiti. In fact, we're going to reduce the number of times we take people to go back to once a year, once we get started again, hopefully in December. COVID really stopped taking teams. I still went a year ago, but we didn't take a team for a couple of reasons. COVID was one, but COVID's not the reason anymore. Now it's the gang violence. There's essentially no government functioning in the country of Haiti. A few months ago, the president was assassinated. And the rumor is, among our friends in Haiti, is that he had a list of names of government officials that were corrupt, and he was taking steps to remove them from office. And so they hired these gangs to go in, and then they brought in some outsiders from South America to assassinate him. And the reason they were searching his home, they were looking for and apparently found that list. The country is running without any real form of government. The gangs control Port-au-Prince and all the large areas and all the roads. Right? So for us to even get there right now is almost impossible. You've probably heard the story of the American missionaries that were kidnapped a few months ago, thankfully all released. Or depending on which version of the story you believe, they were released, they were ransomed, or they escaped. Because all three versions have been in the press, right? So pick one, because it doesn't matter. They're home, right? They're free. Go ahead. Can I just tell you something? I love the people on Laganoff. There is something about them that absolutely captures your heart. I'm really serious when I tell people it's like going to a family reunion without the weird uncle. Not to say there aren't any weird people in Laganoff, they have their share. But it's different. Go ahead. You know what I love about not being a medical person? Is the fact that while the medical people are doing their thing, I always take one extra translator, always hire one extra translator that stays with me. And while they're doing the health stuff, I'm sitting around talking to the people, the grandparents, the mom and dad, and the kids. Right? I get to hold babies like crazy. So awesome. I love babies. I'm not as crazy about 4 to 12-year-olds, I'm not going to lie. They're hard. They are hard. But you know what I learned when our kids grew up? Adult children are 1,000 times more difficult than small children because you can't fix their boo-boos and you can't tell them what to do and what not to do. And in fact, if they don't ask for your advice, don't give it because they're not going to listen to it anyway and they're not going to appreciate it. They're not going to say, oh, thank you, Dad, for your infinite wisdom. It's like, Dad, I'm an adult now. Yes, you are, but you're not very smart sometimes. Because you're doing the same things I did, and I'm trying to tell you not to do them because this is what's going to happen. You're like, yeah, it won't happen that way for me. Because we all say that, right? We set our cruise control for 80 mile an hour when it's a 70 mile speed limit because in our minds we're like, I won't get stopped. And then when we do want to argue with the police officer, here's my theory. If I get pulled over because I'm speeding, just say, yes, sir. Yep. I made the decision to go 80 and not 70. That's on me. Give me the paper. Doesn't mean I'm happy about having to pay the ticket, but I brought it on myself. Right? No one set my cruise control for me. Right? Go ahead. Part of what we do is we do these community health lessons, but we also, for every family, when we first visit them, we give them a Creole Bible, and we give them a book called To Your Good Health, written in Creole by an American missionary doctor. She grew up as a missionary kid, came back to the States, got her medical degree, and went right back to Haiti. Has been there almost all of her life. And she wrote this book because her focus is so the same as what our focus is on. It's a lot cheaper and a lot easier to do the right things before you get sick than to fix it after you get sick. Yeah, you're still going to get sick sometimes, right? When we get older and our bodies start to not work as well. I turned 60 in December, and I did a big landscaping job in my house earlier this week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday nights until after dark on 2 of them. And I discovered it takes me twice as long and I'm twice as sore as I was when I was 40. And my dad has told me, yeah, well, I'm 84 and I promise you it's going to double again when you hit 80. Like, great. Go to the next one. Go ahead. Go ahead to the next one. This is them kind of gathering around for a training. This was before we got in the circle, because we do it in a circle. There's nobody standing up lecturing. You sit down, you're asking questions, giving scenarios and saying, what did you see? And walk through all that together. So what we don't tell them, what we think they need to know, we allow them to own their own learning. You know what happens when you own your own? You remember it. Right? It's why. How many of you remember what you studied in 9th grade history class? You never owned it, you memorized those dates. And some of them stick, most of them don't. Okay? Go ahead. Is that the last one? Oh, here we go. So what's happened since 2012 when we started doing community health evangelism in Haiti? Go ahead. I think each click will bring up another line. So to date, over 2,500 latrines have been completed. So what we did was, the very first lesson was on how to prevent cholera, dysentery, and typhoid. This was about a year and a half after the earthquake. People were dying rapidly from typhoid that hadn't even existed in Haiti for 100 years until UN soldiers brought it into Haiti after the earthquake and dumped their latrines into the rivers, which is where people get their drinking water, where they took their baths and all the other stuff, did their laundry, everything, right? Go ahead. Over 2,500 families have been taught the Solus method, and I knew I needed to bring in my water bottle. I'm gonna steal yours. So if you take a water bottle like this, which are laying on the ground all over Haiti, there's no trash pickup, there's no recycling, they're laying everywhere. And most of them actually still have the lids on them, even though they're empty. You take this label off, you put water in this that's not safe to drink, and lay it on their tin roofs for 6 hours. It will have less bacteria than this bottle I am holding in my hand, purchased at a store in the United States. In fact, I'm so convinced of it, a few years ago, Sean and I asked to talk about Che at a medical conference on the island of Laganab. There were doctors and nurses and community health people from all over the world. South Korea, France, Scotland, England, US, Haiti, like 60, 70 people. And Sean and I went out the afternoon before the conference, and we found a mud puddle that while we were looking at this mud puddle, 2 pigs ran through it, a guy rode his motorcycle through it, a truck went through it, and a bunch of kids ran through it in their bare feet, and a couple of chickens just for good measure. We went over and we took 2 water bottles and we put about that much water in each one. In fact, the guy who owns the welding shop, the Haitian gentleman, comes running down from his shop like, no, don't drink, not good, not good. Like, we know, it's okay. We took it back to the guest house. We took those bottles and we dipped them in the toilet, not the tank, the bowl. And then we both spit in both of them. Then we put the lids back on them. We took one outside and laid it on a metal roof. We took the other one and set it in our room. I tied a ribbon around the one we put on the metal building, not knowing that that was going to be important later. We'd also taken some donated microscopes for the School of Nursing that they had just opened at the hospital in Longanoff. And so we made slides. We had about 8 of those. We made a slide from each bottle for all 8, and we had all these medical people walk through and look. In the one that we had just left in our room was every kind of bacteria you can imagine, including trichomonas, which is an STD, which lives in the soil in Haiti. You could see it. Now, I'm not a scientist, so I wouldn't have known what it was, except that there were a lot of scientists in the room that helped inform that for me. In the other one that we had hung, or that we had laid on the roof for 6 hours, there was nothing. Nothing alive. And so at the end of our presentation, Sean goes off script. And he says, oftentimes, we tend to come to countries to try to do community health and development and all these other things, and we say we believe things, but we don't do anything that really demonstrates we believe them. Like, you gotta be kidding me, Sean. I pick up the bottle that has the ribbon tied around it, and I opened it, and I took a drink. There was this very loud collective gasp, because we had described already where we got the water. Like, and for the next 2 days, everybody I would see would say, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you sick?" I say, "No, I'm fine." I knew I would be. But they asked us to close the conference, and I said this. I said, a couple of days ago, you all were shocked. You were dismayed. You were upset that I drank from that bottle. Here's the truth. If I wouldn't drink from that bottle, it's unconscionable for me to teach that method. If I don't believe it, I should never teach it. Go ahead, we'll quickly wrap this up. We now have health committees. Our vision was 10 communities in 10 years. That's now. God had such a much bigger vision. And what happened is there began to be successes in one community. The ones around it would go to them and say, "Your children don't have orange hair from lack of nutrition. Your children don't have distended bellies because they're starving. Your people aren't sick. There's no typhoid." Within 6 months of teaching water, sanitation, and hygiene to the people in Pick-Me, there has not been a case since. In 9.5 years. Not a single case documented. Those cases go to the hospital. The hospital said to us, and I confirmed this recently, they still have not seen a case of any of those things, those water and hygiene-related diseases. Okay? Go ahead. As of December, over 8,500 people through those community health lessons taught by people they know in their own community who already have credibility with them, mostly pastors and Christian school teachers. Most schools in Haiti are Christian schools, which creates this oxymoron. If there's so much education in Christian schools, well, why is there so much violence? I don't even have an answer for that. But I do know God's doing some amazing things. Well, I'll say this, that violence doesn't extend to Longanoff. It's on the main island. If you go to Longanoff, it's very calm, very quiet. It's impacted because of the lack of ability to transmit or transfer goods. That's the last one. I think there's a... Go ahead. We started doing the same thing in Cambodia. I just got word last week. I was on a conference call. We've been asked to help do CHE training with various mission organizations. So we're working with a task force trying to develop what that'll look like. How we'll do that, especially when some of them are already on mission fields. But we also want to open it up to not just people who are called to be vocational missionaries. So we have this term at Columbia International where I work now. We're trying to train 2 kinds of people. Professional ministers, which would be people who say, I'm a vocation, I'm a pastor, I teach in a Christian school, I'm a missionary. But we also want to train ministering professionals. There's people that have businesses. There's people who do all these other, they're engineers and attorneys and doctors and all these other things. People that work in factories to become ministering professionals to do what? To, as they are going, to make disciples. One more. So I've shared this story here before, but some of you have not heard it. And I'm going to say this is our very first trip, very first time to Pick Me in 2012. You know, on the last day, we came upon this little tiny home with this little garden with the most spectacular view of the Caribbean you've ever seen in your life. That property that her little home was on will be worth millions of dollars. And our team did what we do, took her blood pressure, took her pulse. She's in her 80s, which is very unusual. Life expectancy in Haiti's in the upper 40s. She was in her 80s, lived by herself. When we got done, and she kept saying, "Bonje beni ou, bonje beni ou, bonje beni ou." God bless you, over and over again. She said, "Can I tell you my story? What happened?" We said, "Yes, please. That's part of why we go home to home. We can take time to do that. Please tell us." She said, 2 weeks ago, God gave me, in a dream, gave me a vision that I was going to go from my home to the United States and be seen by a doctor. So I've never been to a doctor. She said, "But now I know I understood the drone wrong. He wasn't telling me he was going to take me to the United States to see a doctor. He was telling me he's going to bring doctors to see me at my home." And she lifted her hands. And by the way, we give everybody one of those little dum-dums. Because we've discovered we can't just give them to the children. The parents become very upset, and the grandparents even more so. We just hand them one to everybody in that home. We don't give them out in the community. We don't throw them out of the back of the truck as we're driving up and down the mountain. Hand them one at a time to each person. And she lifted her hands. You can see the dum-dum stick sticking out of the right side of her mouth, that little white line. That's what that is. Her hands raised, weeping. She said, "Messy JC, messy JC, messy JC. Thank you, Jesus." Over and over again. The young lady right there with the red hair, that's Sean's daughter, his oldest daughter, middle daughter, oldest daughter. She went to Cambodia with us too. And while she was in Cambodia, God called her to go back to Cambodia to live and teach English in a secular university. And through that, as she is going, she's making disciples. And you say, "Okay, that's wonderful and stuff, but this is where I am. I don't see myself going and doing." No. It's not about, that's not what it's about. It's about as you are going, as you are living your life, as you are running into people, as you're connecting with people, taking time to hear their stories, taking time to walk the journey hand in hand, side by side. Hand in hand in Haiti being literal. In the culture of Haiti, as men are walking up the path, they tend to be holding hands. Here it has a little different meaning. In Haiti, it does not have that meaning. It's just friendship. I'm not going to lie, the first couple of times that happened to me, it felt really uncomfortable. Really, really uncomfortable. And I've come to the point where it's like, it's not uncomfortable. It's a completely different meaning in their culture. And they talk about this walking life hand in hand, and that's what they're referring to. So let me encourage you. Make up your own mind today to say, "Jesus, as you put people in my path, I will begin, if I'm not already, working on making disciples as I am living for you." Let's pray. Father, thank you this morning for the fact that you allow us to live in community. And God, one of the challenges for many Christians and many churches has been, how do we regain that after a time of not even being permitted to gather? God, it's time. It's time for us to begin to meet back together because we need one another. We're reliant on one another. Not the same way we're reliant on you, but we're reliant on one another. And God, put into each of our paths those people with whom you want us to walk through life with. And God, we acknowledge and we already know that sometimes it will be painful. It will be messy. It will be heartbreaking. And yet you've called us to do it. And so give us that heart, give us that passion, give us that strength, give us that wisdom and discernment and what to say and what not to say. God, I ask for that wisdom and discernment if I'm able to connect with Tyson. Help me to listen more than I talk. Help me to love Tyson. May he sense that love and not a spirit of judgment or condemnation. I pray that you would be working in his heart, you would make that come to pass. And I ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Kevin. Awesome. You always give me so much to think about every time you come here and share. You know, I mean, it really does. It's so simple. You know, I mean, sometimes we get so caught up in just trying to do church that we forget to be the church. And they're being the church. You know, the success of the ministry is simply because you love people. You know, that's something for us to think about. How can we reach our community? What's the best thing that we can do? We just need to love people. We need to love them, because when you love people, it opens opportunities to share the love of God through Jesus Christ. I've been watching The Chosen. Lisa and I have been watching that series. I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. It's incredible. And that's exactly what they do. You know, the followers of Jesus, they go from place to place, and they're just loving people. Jesus is loving people, healing people, and it creates opportunities for him to share about the kingdom of heaven. And so that's a great lesson for us. I appreciate that reminder. 8,500 people. Did you hear that? 8,500 people have come to know Jesus over the last 10 years through the ministry of DecAid Project. Guys, think about that. I mean, we're just this little church in Madisonville, Tennessee. What kind of an impact can we make on the world? I mean, well, there it is right there. 8,500 people have walked out of the darkness and into the light, and we get to be a part of that in a small way. What a great opportunity for us. And I love it that you come every year. I wish we could get every ministry that we support to come and share with us at least once a year. I appreciate your faithfulness in doing that, because that's important, because you need to know that we take very seriously the ministries that we support and the people that we partner with. And I tell you, I'm so proud to be partnered with DecAid Project. I'm so proud that we can be a part of that. And I hope that you guys are as well. Okay. Brother, you went a long time. Yeah. All right. Don't ever complain about this guy, okay? All right. Just kidding. That was great. We need that, because you only come once a year, and so we needed to hear all of that. Well, go ahead and stand and let me properly release you. I ask that you pray for me as well, as you know, keep those in mind that we that we mentioned earlier that just need your continued prayers. Pray for me as I travel. I'm getting ready to leave. As soon as I leave here today, I'm going to Georgia to spend some time with my mom and dad. They're well. They're okay, but it's just time. And I usually go in the springtime and go and spend a little time with them. But I'm looking forward to going and spending a week with them and taking care of some things that my mom and dad are in trouble. They are calling me to come and fix some things around the house. Yeah, those of you who know me, you understand the irony of that. But but pray that God will give me the wisdom and the knowledge. I'm taking some tools with me, and I'm gonna do my best. But anyhow, when I take Lisa with me, it's a whole lot easier. Okay. Well, let me properly release you today. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May He make His face to shine upon you. May He be gracious unto you